By now you've probably heard that the Dan Andrews state government has cancelled the 2026 Commonwealth Games. Now, this decision comes at a time when property prices in Melbourne, although they are rising, the rate of price increase is actually among the slowest of all our capital cities, and property prices in regional Victoria, which is where the Games were supposed to be held mainly, are actually falling. So today I want to look at what could the impact on property prices be as a result of this decision by Dan Andrews, and 4 reasons why, if you're looking to buy an investment property in Victoria, you may want to pause and reconsider. So let's begin with reason number 1, which is something most investors completely forget to think about. The Victorian state government is broke. Now, when I'm advising people on where the best places are to buy, I'm often looking at the economic health of the area. Is revenue increasing? Is profitability increasing? But here we have an entire state government that is broke and that has the highest debt to revenue ratio of all our states, and it's actually one of the most indebted states globally. Have a look at this. Victoria's humiliating ranking as analysts compare it with similar states' debts. Alarming data has revealed how Victoria is embarrassingly dominating several other states and provinces globally by having the most debt. New data has put Victoria's alarming debt crisis into perspective, with the state currently owing the most out of 17 similar vicinities across the world. An analysis by credit rating agency Standard & Poor's S&P revealed Victoria outranks not only all Australian states, but has acquired more debt than 10 other states and provinces in Canada and Germany. The states lost its AAA credit rating in 2020, dropping down to AA, with tax-supported debts estimated for next year now sitting at almost 203% of operating revenue. So what that means is that for every dollar of revenue that comes in, $2 goes out. How could you manage your own household budget if that was your cash flow plan, right? And this is an entire state budget, okay? And so what that means is that if you think about buying in Melbourne or you buy in regional Victoria because you think a major infrastructure plan is coming in, you can't trust it because you don't know when the Victorian state government is going to pull the plug, just like they've done in the Commonwealth Games. But that's not the only major project that's at risk of being canned. As you can see from this article, Dan Andrews' Suburban rail loop project is now also under the microscope because of cost blowouts. This article says, Grattan Institute's Transport Director Marion Terrell has joined Victorian Liberals to call for the project initially expected to cost $50 billion, but already estimated by the Parliamentary Budget Office at more than $200 billion. So that's only a 4-fold increase in the cost of this project, right? To be paused amid a federal review of major projects. It's time for a rethink because there is such great uncertainty over the costs, and it is far from clear why this project is a priority when other projects are being mothballed, Ms. Terrell told the Australian Financial Review. And then you've got another major infrastructure project in Melbourne that's been put on pause. That's the $10 billion airport rail. Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews has pressed pause on the $10 billion Melbourne Airport Rail project amid a federal government review of infrastructure projects and discussions with the Prime Minister. After weeks of speculation about the future of the airport rail project, the Victorian government confirmed on Wednesday that work will be paused. So you can see here we've got multiple projects right now that the state government was supposedly trying to fund, all being paused. So if you're thinking about buying a property in an area because of project XYZ, like maybe this new airport rail, or maybe the state railway loop, or whatever it is, you can't trust the government to follow through on their promises simply because they're broke. So therefore, when you buy in Victoria, if you still choose to, you're taking a big risk because you have no certainty about some of these infrastructure projects which were supposed to bring in a great amount of money, bring in more jobs, bring in more people to live in these areas and make property prices rise. So it's a big risk trusting the Victorian state government to follow through on their promises when they've got no money to begin with. Now, as a result of the Victorian state government not having any money and being broke, then they are making it worse. Why? They are going after property investors to leech off property investors and use investors as their personal piggy bank. And that brings us to reason number 2 why you may want to reconsider investing in Victoria. Now, if you look at the rental yields in especially Melbourne and many parts of regional Victoria, what you'll find is that for the price that you need to pay for a property, the rent that you get is among the lowest in the country. So your cash flow is already bad. But then, as I said, the state government is making it worse. Why? Because they are coming after you and taxing property investors. For example, in the latest state budget, the Dan Andrews government announced that from January of 2024, they are changing the land tax thresholds. So what does that mean? Well, currently, your first $300,000 worth of land is land tax free. You don't pay any land tax on that. But going forwards from January, that threshold comes back all the way down to $50,000. Essentially what that means is that any investment property you have that has a land value of $50,000 or more, you're going to pay tax on that, which is again going to hit your hip pocket and make the cash flow on your investment properties even worse than they are right now. Tax slug for Victorians with investment properties or holiday homes. Victorians with second homes or investment properties will pay a new flat rate tax of up to $975 plus an additional levy on the value of their land from January 1st, 2024. The temporary measure will last for the next 10 years as part of the government's plan to pay down its COVID debt. Now, if you think 10 years is temporary, it's going to stop after 10 years, well, then you and I look at things differently. I think this land tax is here to stay. The land holdings component of the COVID debt levy in this year's Victorian budget will raise $4.7 billion by decreasing the tax-free threshold for general land tax rates for properties that are not a principal place of residence. The government expects 860,000 Victorians will be affected, of which 380,000 will be first-time taxpayers. Property groups have slammed the new measure as a tax on mum and dad investors and warned it will raise rents. But then if you think, okay, as an investor, if I have to pay more in land tax, I'll increase the rents because there is a supply shortage right now in Victoria. What does the state government do to make it even worse for investors? They become the only government to consider consulting with the Greens to introduce rental caps and a rental freeze, even though there's global proof that this does not work. Victorian government bends knee to Greens, considers rent caps. In a desperate bid to gain support from the Greens for tax reforms, included in the state's upcoming budget, the Andrews government is heavily considering several renter safeguards, including rent caps. A letter penned by Victorian Treasurer Tim Pallas, addressed to Samantha Rutnam, leader of the Victorian Greens, and Sam Hibbins, the party's Treasurer spokesperson, revealed plans for a Growth and Housing Task Force (GHT) Committee of Cabinet led by Deputy Premier Jacinta Allen, which will consider housing supply, housing affordability, and renters' rights. The letter provided to Smart Property Investment sister brand REB by the Victorian Greens Party sees Mr. Pallas confirm part of the task force's ongoing work will see them take detailed consideration towards further protection for renters, including rent caps or other forms of rent control. In other words, the Victorian state government is coming after property investors. They're taxing you, they are then making it harder for you to increase rents, and they're really going to leech your cash flow. But then you might think, well, look, I don't really need to worry about cash flow. I may as well buy for capital growth. Well, then have a look at this chart. And this brings us to the fourth and final reason why you may want to reconsider buying in Melbourne or in regional Victoria. Here we have the Home Values Index, data provided by CoreLogic, which shows how much property prices are rising. You can see the dark blue lines of the capital cities, and Sydney is racing ahead. But then Melbourne, of all the capital cities that are rising right now, is actually rising the least. Brisbane is outperforming Melbourne, Adelaide is outperforming Melbourne, and Perth is outperforming Melbourne. So Melbourne's only better than Canberra, Darwin, and Hobart. And when you consider that property prices, for example, in Brisbane are about 20% cheaper than they are in Melbourne, so you can buy for less, prices are growing more in Brisbane, and rents are much stronger, you have to wonder as an investor, why are you looking to buy in Melbourne? Why are you looking to buy in Victoria? Are you making a decision based on data? Or are you just buying there because you think you should, other people have told you, and you're really not making a decision based on data? So then the question is, if you don't buy in Melbourne and you don't buy in Victoria, where should you buy an investment property? Well, to answer that question, check out the description below for some free resources that will really point you in the right direction. I'll see you next time.